We have Tommy Archer here with us this morning, and if some of you were here the last time he spoke, and he is an amazing teacher of the Word. He's always been a friend of Verge. He's there. The Archers are friends of the Stinnetts, and he is currently the youth pastor at Crossroads Church, and so we are so happy to have Tommy Archer and his entire family. Let's go ahead and give it up for Tommy and his entire family, and welcome him to the stage.
Thanks, John. A more appropriate introduction would probably be, hey, here's Tommy Archer, the guy that comes in about once every 6 months and makes you realize what you have in your pastor, Michael. Yeah, makes you miss him. It's always an honor to be here, though, and like you said, the Stinnetts are great friends of ours. Verge is a great friend of the church that we go to called Crossroads, and so anytime that we can help Verge out and help the Stinnetts out at the same time, hey, we're all in. It's exciting for me to hear about what's going on here, that you're, as a church, reading together through the Bible. And my understanding has been that what you've been doing is picking a passage out that you have read through the week as a church, and then really kind of going deeper with that passage. So we want to continue that on for you today. So I think in your bulletin there's a notes section in the middle that actually has the verses that we're going to talk about today. They're going to come out of Proverbs in chapter 17 and 18. And there's going to be 4 verses that we're going to look at today. So really not that much, but it's 4 that I think are really insightful as we learn about those. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put some notes up here, so if you want to, as I make notes here, if you can read my writing, if it's intelligible enough, and maybe just pencil down these notes on your page that you have there in front of you. But we're going to compare and contrast 2 different types of people. Okay? On one side, it's going to be the wise. And on the other side, it's going to be the fool. And if you've read through Proverbs very much at all, you understand that really this is sort of the theme of the whole book. The author Solomon, he talks to his son and he says, I want you to grow up to be a wise individual. I want you to have wisdom as you move through this life. And I do not want you to be the fool. Now there's certain words as we go through Proverbs that are usually associated with each person. When it comes to the wise individual, you might see understanding. You might, of course, see the word wisdom. You might see prudent. When it comes to the fool, you're going to see some words which are mentioned. You might see, of course, foolish, being obvious. Simpleton. Let me see, I know I'm missing one more. And silly, being the other one. So foolish, simpleton, silly. And over here, we have one more that I want to write down, and that is discernment. So if it talks about a discerning person, it's talking about the wise. So that kind of helps us as we read through these verses to quickly understand and recognize which one he's talking about as we look at these. Some other words that we're going to talk about, which are key in these 4 verses, are the words lips and mouth. Pretty simple to gather. So, of course, we're going to be talking about our speech. We're going to be talking about, along associated with this, the tongue. What comes out of our mouth. Now, something that I found out that was really interesting to me anyway, which I think is helpful as we move along, is these words sort of, if you look at the root word that is used here that we will translate in our Bible as lips or mouth, they could also have another meaning. So if you're looking at another verse that's describing something else, then they might use this very word to describe what's going on there. This would be also mentioned as describing the edge of a shore. And you'll see as we move along why this is important, I think, to mention this. The mouth is also, the word translated for the literal mouth, could be used to describe the opening of a river. Of course, you've heard the phrase probably before that the mouth of the river. That would be the opening of the river. All right, with that said, now let's begin to look at our verses, and we're going to pull out some things, and what we're going to do is we're just going to categorize them on which side that they fall, and as we go along to look at these two different types of mouths or lips, the wise or the foolish. Verse 27, this should be on the screen, and it's again in your notes section as well, if you want to pencil down some things on that. He who restrains his words has knowledge. He who restrains his words has knowledge. So if we look at the word knowledge, which one are we talking about here? We're talking about the wise individual, because we said this is associated with someone that is a wise person. And what does it say about him? It says there's an action that he does. Okay, the verb in this sentence, the action that he does, it says that he restrains. Now, this word restrains means to hold back, to refrain. Okay? Simply like to stop, you might think. When you restrain something, you're holding it back. You know, you're not letting it be released out. And it says the wise individual is one who restrains, but he restrains something. What does he restrain? What did the verse say? His words. So he restrains words. Now, if he's a wise individual and he's holding back, restraining back his words, do you think this is talking about good words here? You think this is talking about encouraging words that will be coming out of his mouth? No, a wise individual wouldn't do that. What you need to realize is the four verses that we're looking at, typically what they're talking about is conflict in relationships, conflict and how we handle it with our lips, how we handle it with our mouth. And what this says here is the wise person in a conflict, the wise person, when he has something he wants to say, some words he wants to give, he's going to restrain them. And here's why I think it's important as we look at the other description of these. I want you to almost think of it as like he builds a levee. Like you would build a levee. The edge of the shore, the lips are the edge of the shore. If I open that levee, I let the mouth flow. I let the river flow out of my mouth, right? So when I get in conflict sometimes, if you don't watch, the tendency is if I think it, I'm going to let it go. And when I let it go, it's going to be a river of negative words that are not for building up, that are not for the proper use in that situation. But it's what I want to say. Right? It says the wise individual restrains. He has restraint in that situation. Let's look at the next one. Well, first of all, let's pencil down this, just so we get the contrary. So we would say if the wise has restraint, then the fool has no restraint, correct? He's going to be the opposite we described. He's going to let it go. If I think it, I'm going to say it. All right? So, now let's move on to the second half of 27 here. So we'll read that again. He who restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. So again, we're talking about the wise. The wise individual, it says, has a cool spirit. When you look up this, it says it's a calm soul. Peaceful, peace in his soul. Okay? So the wise individual has the ability to restrain the words that he doesn't need to say because he's got a calm soul. He's got a soul, and I really think when it comes down to it, the only way that our spirit can be calm, our spirit can be at peace, is what Augustine said once. And he said, our hearts are restless until they rest in God. Okay? So, if this one is calm, it's because he says, you know, God's got this. On the contrary, over here, we have a restless soul. We have one that's unsettled, that needs to get out what he needs to get out, she needs to get out, because guess what? I got to fight for myself. I've got to get this. I have these selfish desires, like we all do. Okay? James chapter 3, which if you go read that, it talks about what? Taming the tongue, restraining the tongue. But then it also talks about conflicts, and it says, why do we fight? Why do we quarrel? Because we want and we don't have, right? The desire is there for what I want, what Tommy Archer wants, and I don't have it. So when it comes to my kids are not obeying me. Sometimes it can turn from what I need to teach them to really just teach them for their betterment to, it's about me now. I'm your dad, you're not obeying me. So now I'm going to get into a battle of words with you simply because I want you to submit to your father. Understand? It moves to selfishness. Between spouses sometimes we argue and we fight over things like money and other things, decisions. Where we're going to eat, for crying out loud. We'll fight and we'll argue. Why? And the root of it often is because this is what I want. I want Olive Garden. I don't want Chili's. Okay? And it says that because of that, we're going to be no restraint. Let it go. I'm not listening. You need to listen. I got a few things I want to tell you, and I'm going to tell them to you. Okay? And it says the wise operates in a different way with a cool spirit. I guess this was about 3 years ago. I had a buddy, and it was interesting when I thought about this because the conversation took place in this very parking lot when Crossroads used to be here. This is the type of leader, the type of guy that every church needs to have around. Because this is the type of guy, if there's a meeting and there's an elephant in the room, this guy's going to acknowledge the elephant in the room. If a question needs to be asked, if something needs to be said, this guy, he's not afraid of conflict, so he's just going to ask that question and put it out there while everybody else is sitting there saying, I knew that needed to be asked, but I didn't have the guts to ask it. That's the type of guy this is. However, as you can imagine, maybe with that personality, more of a type A, he sometimes with his spouse would really try to be controlling. The arguments would really go on. And he said, man, we're just struggling. We just find ourselves, we're just arguing over and over about things. And I don't know what to do. This was my advice to him in that parking lot a few years ago when he came back to me about a year later and he said, man, you don't know how much that helped me with what you said. But here's what I told him. And what I was trying to do for him was build what this is talking about, a filter. I said, when you get in conflict with your wife, do not say the first 3 things that come to your mind. Okay? And the reason I told him that was because, again, I understood because the way he was telling me about the situation is once they got in conflict, it was, and it was, okay? The river was flowing. And it would end up leading to more conflict and not them, coming back together, but more conflict in a way. So I was like, you need to pause. You need to think. This is what I want to say right here. But if you think through it, then you're probably going to change it a little bit. Okay? Then I need to think through it again a second time. And I need to think, okay, is there any selfishness in this? Is this for, really trying to resolve here, resolution, or is this about me? And then think through it again. So the first 3 things that come to your mind, don't speak them. Sit there. And that's also going to make you do one other thing that I don't know if you're doing enough, which is listening to your spouse. And he said for him, he said, man, that was huge. And that's really what this is talking about. Is this talking about that the wise individual in conflict does not just open up the floodgates. He's just not bloviating. He holds back. he builds that wall and doesn't just let it go. Okay, let's look on. This is going to talk about the fool in verse 28. Even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. So, the fool is, let's see, how can we write this? Appears wise when quiet. Is the fool can actually look like he belongs over here, even though the whole time he's still a fool. You get that? He's a fool, but if the fool will just be quiet and listen, he can appear to be a wise, discerning individual, is what Solomon is saying here. I got an example of this, and that is when it comes to cars, I'm really a fool. I'm what you would describe as a YouTube mechanic. If there is a video out there and the video is simple and I can follow it on the screen, then maybe I can fix my car with some kind of small things. But there's even YouTube videos that I've tried watching about solutions, and I get about 2.5 minutes in and I'm turning it off. No way I can do that. I'm taking it to somebody. Okay? So I really don't know a lot about cars. I'm a fool when it comes to cars and trucks. Okay? We went to a yard sale at a baseball tournament, and this was a good yard sale. And this yard sale was so good, they had a couple cars out there for sale. And when we pulled up, I was like, especially one of them, saw the price on the window. I thought, that's a pretty good price for that car, I think. So I went out there to look at the car, and my wife went up to the yard sale. This lady comes out, and rather than begin to talk a lot myself, therefore exposing who I really am when it comes to cars, I just asked a few questions. I said, could you tell me more about this car? And she went on and on about it, who was the driver and all this. It was their daughter. She drove it back and forth to college. I said, is there any issues with it? There's one issue with one brake pad, but other than that, it squeaks a little bit. And I thought, it's not bad. Other than that, we've had no issues with it. I think I asked, is the price negotiable at all? But I just asked questions. So after about a 5-minute conversation, I'm still standing here looking at the car. She goes back up the hill, and her friend's up there working the yard sale. My wife is standing in earshot, distance of them. She walks up and she said, that guy knows a lot about cars. And my wife said, no, he doesn't. He doesn't know anything about cars. And I thought, you're killing me, Smalls. You're killing me. Trying to get us a bargain here. But really, just by staying silent in that situation, somehow I came across appearing to be wise in that situation when actually I wasn't. Look at the second part here. When he closes his lips, so this is again talking about the fool who, if he keeps silent, he's considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is considered prudent. So the same thought here. So what we can write down here is that we learn something else about the wise because he appears to be wise when he closes his lips. And again, when you look at this word closes, it is the word for to shut up, or close. And to me, kind of gives the same impression of what we're talking about up here with the idea of the river of the bad words that we want to just pour forth. The fact that we want to be heard and we can't hold it back and we just blah in a situation when conflict comes. The nature of building a levee there, of holding back. The lips are the levee. They're the edge of the shore, refraining. And there's a lot of wisdom in that, he says. Let's look to the second verses that we're going to look at today. This is chapter 18, because we're kind of staying on theme here, so we're skipping down to just 6 and 7. And it says, a fool's lips bring strife. A fool's lips bring. So here's the verb, here's the action. He brings something. If I go outside, I will go outside and I will bring in the groceries. Okay? So I go to get the groceries to bring them in. I'm actively going for something to bring it in. And what does it say that the fool's lips bring? Strife. So the more a foolish person goes on and on and on, the more it doesn't bring peace, but it brings strife. It brings conflict, more conflict, because of the nature of the things that are coming out are really more about me than about you. Look at this, what it says here, and it really just cracks me up. In his mouth, okay, so a fool's lips bring strife, and his mouth calls for blows. So, here's our action again. It calls. It proclaims. And it calls for Can you read that? Hit me. That's what it's calling for. It calls for blows. The NIV says here, it invites a beating, is the way they translate it. I mean, think about that. Have you ever been around someone that the more they're talking and the more they're talking and the more they're talking, you just say, I'd love to slug you in the mouth. I mean, you just keep on going on and keep on going on, and it makes me want to just whack. It's like the fool's mouth, the more they talk and the more they talk, it's like saying, hit me, please. It brings strife. It calls for blows, is what it says. Invites a beating. So, the wise mouth, it would bring peace. Maybe so we can understand a little better, it would more work toward reconciliation. Because it's going to be working for both instead of just for myself. Let's look at this 7th verse. A fool's mouth is his ruin. And this is where it gets really, really sad. A fool's mouth is his ruin. So, the fool's, he just gets, when it's played out, he just gets ruined. Because of the way of the things that pour forth. That's a good way of thinking about it with the analogy that we're using here. Okay? It's constantly that way, a barrage of that, and it leads to ruin. What do you think, with the idea of conflict, ends up being ruined? It's relationships. A fool with a fool's mouth is going to end up with ruined relationships. We've got a dog, and he's kind of a mix. His name's Champ, and he's a big dog, really just a big baby. But he's had the tendency lately of roaming a little bit. And the other morning, I went to work, and they couldn't find him. They started driving around, and the property that's behind ours, someone had a trap set to catch coyotes. And when they drove over there, Champ was in the trap, the snare, okay? Look what it says here in this last part. It says, and his lips are the snare of his soul. So he's ruined relationships, and his lips, which go on and on, are really kind of a trap for him. When they pulled up, Champ really wasn't struggling. He wasn't really trying to be aggressive to get out of it. He was just laying there. At first, they didn't even know if he was truly caught in it. But there he was with his leg ensnared, so he couldn't go anywhere. And I think that's a good picture for what Solomon is describing here, of the way that a fool ends up. A fool who is just about, I'm just going to say what I want to say, when I want to say it, the way I want to say it, and if you have a problem with it, that's your problem. Because that's kind of the picture we're getting here from the fool's lips. Is what that leads to is a person like Champ who is all alone and is really just trapped and has ruined his relationships. Because that person right there is the one that says, my friends don't really want to have anything to do with me anymore. My family doesn't want to have anything to do with me anymore. And I've really just ruined this. And they're just kind of there alone. Trapped by their lips is what he says. Well, Champ was sitting there, and he was just stuck. Didn't know what to do. There was nothing really he could do. But someone came along, and they freed Champ from that. And here's what I want you to think about. As we've looked at the wise mouth, the wise tongue, and we've looked at the fool and the way that he operates in his life, we have all at times, whether we care to admit it or not, we're the fool in the way we talk. I mean, we will go to baseball games, and it's like, you are the worst ump I've ever seen in my life. That is a terrible call. My kid was safe, and you called him out. So if I continue to speak my heart, it's, my kid should have been safe, so he wins the championship, but you took it away because you made a wrong call, and I'm ticked. That's the picture we're getting here from the foolish mouth. I think it, I speak it, I let it go. But well, look what it leads to. But there is someone who can actually tame the tongue. There is someone that can actually set us free from this trap of misery, that can help us, and it's the Lord. It's the Lord. The reason the lips are so big here is because you see it involved in the situation of salvation. Romans 10:9 says that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Listen to that. If you confess with your mouth, confession of the mouth, belief in the heart involved with this. But that it has to involve a mouth which is determined, I can't do this on my own. I can't fix this situation. I need help, like old Champ that was out there. So it's about salvation and especially about lordship. It's about, I have to give everything in my life to the Lord. Say, take control of it all, especially my tongue. And that's going to involve me pulling back, restraining. You give me the words, especially when conflict comes, because that's when we just want to speak. But to be cool, calm in my spirit, because he has done it for me. And I don't have to defend myself in this. I don't really have to fight for myself. He fought the battle and he won it. So I can be calm at spirit and understand, hey, if it doesn't work out exactly like I think, it's got to have something in it that he wants to show me. But Lord, you be the Lord of my whole self, especially taming my tongue. Okay? 3 action steps that we want to take here today. Pretty simple things from what we've talked about, from what we've learned. And if the Lord had one for you that is completely different from these, maybe he had something specifically for you, some kind of action step you need to take, and I'll say you need to take that today. The first thing is, I think we can look at what we've learned here about restraint and holding back and not holding back, no restraint, just pouring forth. No kind of a dam or a levee in this situation, but it's all forward. We can say that a great action step is probably we need to talk less. Talk less. especially when it comes to conflict again. Because if in a situation of conflict, if we will talk less, we're set up to do the second step. And the second step is not only talk less, listen more. Because if you listen in conflict, you're going to learn. And maybe you'll pick up something that you're never picking up because you're so worried about saying what you want to say. So talk less, listen more. There's that old saying, you got 2 ears, 1 mouth. You need to listen twice as much as you speak. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So 1, talk less. 2, listen more. And the third one is to find your deepest desires in Him. Because when we pour forth the negative things, when we fight for ourselves, it's really all about, because I got to get what I want. It goes back to that selfishness. But if we find our deepest desires in Him, like I was talking about, then our hearts, our souls can be at peace. And we can move out of that. And that's a simple way. I already kind of described it. But really all you got to do is just ask Him. Maybe it's through a prayer. Maybe you just get in your car alone, talk to Him out loud. But just to simply say, Lord, I need You. I need You to come into my life. I know I'm a fool a lot. And I know I've done some foolish things. But thank You for going to the cross for me and for dying for my sins, for my foolishness. Lord, just come into my life and You take over because I need You. I don't need Your help. I need You to take over. And that means being the Lord of my life and of my mouth. Because I don't want to be known as a foolish individual with my mouth. I don't want to ruin my relationships. I want to be wise in the way that I operate. Maybe today is the day that you make that decision. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank You so much for Verge. I thank You for what they represent, which is You. I thank You for what they're trying to do in this community. And I pray, Lord, just for continued success for them. And Lord, as we learn today from the wisdom of Solomon, Lord, from the wisdom of You, about what it means to be a wise and foolish individual with our mouth, I pray that You help us to speak as You speak, to have lips with wisdom of You, and not just constantly flow out our own desires, which leads to ruin, destruction like a flood. The Lord's help us to be wise in the way that we operate. I pray You were glorified today in this service.